so this is why when I'm teaching women about birth, I'm literally teaching them how to be equipped as mothers, as wives, as women, because the work that you do now is going to impact that part of your life. And I believe that God created birth to work. And most of the time when left alone, it does.
Do you believe that Jesus belongs in the center of every part of your life, including labor? Does a natural or low intervention birth appeal to you, but you feel overwhelmed on how to prepare for one? Are you so ready to feel confident, at peace, and even excited as you partner with the Lord to bring new life into this world? Because if so, you are in the right place, friend. Welcome to the Faithful Labor Podcast. I'm your host, Audrey Stinson, Bible-believing Christian, childbirth educator, wife, and mama to 4. 2 born via C-section and 2 delivered at home. After going through 2 challenging deliveries where I outsourced my birth decisions and left my faith out of the process, the Lord graciously led me to experience 2 redemptive home births. Now, they are redemptive not because they happened at home, but because through prayer, study, and wise guidance, I learned to trust God's design for birth and believe wholeheartedly that He was with me, for me, and faithful through it all. In this podcast, you'll gain a deeper understanding of physiological birth, hear inspiring stories from fellow Christian moms and experts, discover holistic tips for pregnancy and postpartum, and above all, find biblical encouragement to help you keep Christ at the center of your birth preparation. So grab your water bottle, settle in, and let's get your heart and mind prepared for the faith-deepening experience of laboring with God and for His glory. Well, hey everybody. So before I get into introducing the speaker that I am interviewing in today's episode, I did just want to give a little heads up to the first part of our discussion. So in asking her how she came from this highly medicalized RN background into being an advocate for home birth, she broke down for me her first birth story. And in that experience, there is a lot of birth trauma that she uncovered. So hear me when I say, I am not saying I think you should just skip the first part of the conversation into what we're going to discuss later, because it's all good. It's really all so great. But I didn't want this to blindside you that the first part of our discussion is going to dabble into some traumatic things. So if you are not in a headspace for that, or if you need to protect your brain, protect your thoughts as you head into labor here shortly, I just want to advise some discernment. You might hear this and think, oh, Audrey, I'm totally fine. And there will be really helpful things that you hear in that first part of our discussion that if you have the capacity for it, I really don't want you to miss. But again, I did want to give you a heads up to not have anything catch you off guard so that you knew what we were going to be discussing before you got into it and thought, oh my, I don't know if I'm ready for this. So there's that little caveat. And now I am going to introduce my guest, Allie McClain, to you guys. Allie is a dedicated advocate for empowering first-time home birth mothers to embrace the beauty and serenity of home birth in a Christ-centered way. As the host of the Peaceful Home Birth podcast, registered nurse and home birth coach, Allie combines her passion for holistic health, mindset techniques, and practical wisdom to guide expectant mothers through every step of their journey to a peaceful and empowering birth experience. After having a traumatic birth with her first, Allie decided to choose a different experience for the next baby, and she has gone on to home birth her next 3 children as well as help many women in person and online have the peaceful birth they desire. Her gentle yet confident approach reassures mothers that they have the strength and support they need to navigate the birthing process with grace and confidence. Through insightful interviews, heartfelt conversations, and actionable advice, Allie creates a warm and nurturing space where mothers can find encouragement, guidance, and spiritual nourishment on their path to parenthood. Whether discussing the benefits of natural childbirth, sharing personal anecdotes, or exploring the intersection of faith and childbirth, Allie is dedicated to helping mothers cultivate a sense of peace, joy, and empowerment as they welcome their little ones into the world. And without further ado, here is that conversation with Allie. Well, hey, Allie, thank you so much for joining me today. If you have not heard from my other episodes, I refer back to Allie and her podcast, the Peaceful Home Birth Podcast, quite often. It's mostly in my show notes, trying to refer people over there. But we actually had a couple conversations last year about my birth stories and my birth experiences. And Allie, we had a great conversation. It's so fun to see you and get to have you on my podcast this time.
Yes, I am so excited to be here. Thank you for the invite. And truly, your episodes were one of the best episodes I've done. And I loved hearing your heart for birth and for women. So I'm really excited to be here and have a conversation with you.
Thank you so much. And I will include our conversation in the show notes for anybody who wants to head over to your podcast, which I strongly encourage every single one of y'all listening to do. You will be supremely blessed. But if you want to hear that conversation, I will link that in our show notes. So, this episode, I really would love to hear about how you transitioned from being a nurse and having one idea toward birth and the way that the hospitals do it and the way that our general culture approaches birth, how you had that, came from that, and then wound up choosing a home birth, like how the Lord guided you, how the education that you walked through got you here, and how you can have some encouragement for the moms listening that maybe want a different path for their own birth that has less of a medicalized feel to it. And even before that, I know I included it before we hopped on this conversation, but just in case anybody missed it, tell us who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yes. Well, first and foremost, I am a lover of Jesus, follower of Jesus, and I'm a wife of 11 years. I'm a mom to 4 kids, homeschool mom, and I have been an RN for about 10, a little over 10 years now. I actually got married during nursing school. And like you said, I'm the host of the Peaceful Home Birth podcast. I've been a podcast host for, it's been about 5 years now, I believe, which is crazy. And currently I do home birth coaching for first-time home birth moms so that they can be prepared holistically, mind, body, and spirit. So just a little background, which we'll get into kind of transition into how I got here all, but it really started with a very traumatic C-section experience. And through that experience, I had to confront a lot of beliefs that I had from all growing up. And I had to ask myself some really hard questions, which ultimately ended in me transitioning to, I guess, what you would call the crunchy side of things. And yes, now I've had 3 home births after that. And really, I've spent the past 8 years just dedicated to serving women on their journey to having their dream birth. So that's a little bit about who I am. And yeah.
Yes, every time I hear you talk about your heart for the ministry, because I really do feel like it's a ministry that you operate with your podcast and just the peaceful home birth approach that is in like on social media, all the different things that you have attached to that brand, my heart just soars. Like I just have like a little pitter patter in my chest because there's such a great need for women to have you, to have guidance and support from somebody who not only wants them to have this beautiful dream birth experience, but more importantly, wants to guide them into that. Number one, if that's what the Lord wills for them, because I know you do consults as part of what you offer to your clients, if home birth is even a good fit for them. So number one, helping them figure out, is that even the best call for you? But then number two, how to incorporate whatever their choice is for their birth with the Lord being the primary driver for all their choices and in the midst of whatever their birth scenario looks like, bringing his perfect peace into that place. So I absolutely love your heart for it. It's just so clear that the Lord has laid this path before you. And I just love seeing women who are obedient to his call on their lives. And it is so clear to me that you have done that, Allie. So thank you for the position that you're in and for doing that hard work and for helping moms the way that you have. So love, love all of that. So, just right in line with that, the passion, where your heart for this peaceful home birth came from, can you tell us a little bit how you did this? Maybe, I don't know if a walking back is the way to say it, but mostly like it's just a transition, a shift from birth is super medicalized. We finagle into every part of it, lots of interventions to, okay, maybe there's a different route I can take. How did that progression happen? And where was the Lord's hand in leading you in all of that?
Yeah, great question. Well, first off, thank you for that encouragement. Truly, birth is something that I have grown in such intimacy with the Lord through birth. And so I know that so many people deeply desire that connection with the Lord, and yet we don't understand that birth is such a beautiful way that He is designed to bring that connection. Birth is used as an analogy for our salvation. We are being reborn. And why do you think God would use that analogy if birth itself wasn't very important? And so this is something that truly, like you said, it is a ministry, but it's also a cultural war that we are in. And I think every woman is on the front line, and every woman has to ask herself some very hard questions on if she is going to follow the cultural narrative that has been around for 100 years now, or if she is going to align herself with God's design and follow in the footsteps that He has put there. And so that's something that I had to do, and just kind of going back to that transition, or if you want to even call it a conversion.
I love that. Yes.
Just to set up, to give you a picture of the type of person I was. We'll go back even 10, 20 years prior. I am very justice oriented. I love the truth. I see very black and white. And I grew up knowing Jesus. I grew up believing in right and wrong. And so for me, that was the foundation I held. And then I did see there was a connection with how God created our body, right? I always inherently knew like our body was connected all in some way. I couldn't verbalize how I knew that or why I knew that, but that belief led me into nursing school because I wanted to help people, right? So that was the logical next step. People would speak that over me, like, you would be a great nurse. So I followed in that footsteps. Throughout all of nursing school, I felt incredibly disconnected from the way that the medical system operated. I loved learning about the body. I loved learning about some of the things I could do. And there was a sense of almost power and control and superiority that comes with having a license as a nurse that becomes your identity. There is a sense of almost that God complex that you hear about, right? But pair it along with the religious side of me. I was a very religious person. I didn't have the intimacy with the Lord. I had the rules of the Lord down, right? And then here I am, a nurse, following the rules, doing all the right things, and I'm going to save people, right? And so that was kind of the persona that I left off, that I would show people.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize how damaging that was because there was a blinder. There was a blinder in front of my eyes that I could not remove. And so birth, when I was going through L&D, all I knew was I felt uneasy, but I couldn't put the words to it, right? So I'm on L&D as a nursing student, trying to run away from having to do any of the interventions. Like, I didn't want to put in catheters. I didn't want to, do all the things to help the moms get an epidural. It just all felt so gross to me. So I had decided from that moment, I wasn't planning on being a hospital nurse. I knew I'll just go family practice, be in a clinic, because that all feels gross and foreign and just not aligned with what I'm supposed to do. So I'm in family practice and I am doing all of the well checks for children, right? And everything that comes along with it, if you know what I'm saying. So I don't know if I can say it outright, but I'm going to. So I would give all the vaccines to children, right? And these were the same children that were coming back time after time sick.
Mm.
And I got to know them so well because of how sick they were. And I just started asking myself, why is it that you are coming in so often when we're doing well checks? Like, aren't you supposed to be well? That was probably one of the first questions I started asking myself was, why aren't you well? If we're supposed to be providing well checks, you're not well. You're constantly in this office getting antibiotics and strep tests and all of these things. So there was one day that I was at the office. I took out a package insert from the vaccine box, and I started reading it. Long, long, huge list. If you've ever seen an insert, I start reading it, and I pointed out to my nurse manager, oh my goodness, it says on here that, it hasn't been studied for pregnant women or whatever. I don't remember what exactly I had pointed out, but she was like, oh, you don't need to look at that. Put that away. The CDC information is over here. That's what you give to the patients. And there was a moment that it clicked for me and I started asking questions. That wasn't the moment I stepped away from everything, but it was like the Lord was slowly revealing to me something isn't matching up. Like you feel uneasy in your spirit every time you give a vaccine because there is a reason for it. And so he would just give me small glimpses because I think he knew if he was to just totally like take the veil off of my eyes in 1 minute, it would be very painful. And so there was another time where my nurse manager was like, always give the Gardasil last because it's very common for girls to pass out with the Gardasil shot. And so to me, I'm like, wait a minute, aren't these things supposed to be helping people? And yet I'm like making people pass out. What is going on? Kind of going back to that core belief of your body is connected, right? So like your body is meant to work together. Are we interrupting something that it's making somebody pass out? Like, what is the reason? So I got pregnant during that job, got all of the medical things you could ever have done. I was diagnosed with IUGR, which is intrauterine growth restriction. And so I was getting ultrasounds weekly or monthly.
Yeah.
At one point, I had a breech baby and then not breech and just kept turning back and forth. So 38 weeks, I went into an appointment. She checked my cervix. And a couple of days later, my water breaks on Good Friday after church service. So that was really fun. And I just remember standing up, that happened, and it was a rush from there. We rush home in the middle of this storm, and we're like, oh my gosh, the water broke. Call the hospital, and they want you to come in right away. So I gathered all of our stuff, and we went to the hospital. Essentially, what happened is I was not in labor, so that would be a premature rupture of membrane. So my water had broken, contractions hadn't started, so they let me walk around for a few hours, then was started on Pitocin. I remember the nurse came in and she said, here, I have some Pitocin for you. This is your body's natural hormone just to get things going. And I was like, oh, natural hormone. Cool. Like I knew nothing. Even as a nurse, I had no idea that it was definitely not your body's natural hormone. And from the moment that went into my veins, I call it devil's spit because literally it felt like I was just burning. The contractions were so incredibly intense and I couldn't handle the pain anymore. So of course, as the cascade of interventions go, you start Pitocin. For me, I wanted to hold out as long as possible on the epidural, so I got some IV pain meds, then got the epidural. Shortly after the epidural, I woke up to five nurses around me turning me on my knees and on my left side because the heart rate went down. They gave me tributaline in my leg to stop the contractions, and I believe they turned off the Pitocin at that point. Her heart rate had gone into the 20s, which is so incredibly scary. And this was the first time that I saw my OB come in. So my OB comes in at this point. I had been laboring for about 18 hours, and this was the first time I had seen my doctor. She said, well, if this happens again, we will have to take you back to a C-section. And at that moment, I thought to myself, but that's not what I want. Like, in that moment, I felt out of control. There was nothing I could do to stop the train that was already going down the tracks. Like, there was no turning at this point. 5 minutes later, it happened again, and that's when the chaos and commotion started of, them rolling me back and taking my husband, putting on the suit for him, putting on the hairnet for me, rolling me back crying, saying, no, I don't want this. I don't want this. There was no alternatives discussed. There was no game plan discussed. It was just, this is what's best for your baby. So I dissociated during the procedure. That was the only way I could feel safe. I was strapped, my arms were strapped down to the side as they often are during a C-section. And I remember my husband being here on my left, and on my right was the anesthesiologist, and thinking, I have never seen this man in my entire life. Why is he here right now? And my husband, just a glazed look on his face, like, I don't know what's going on, and I'm crying. And they're cutting me open, taking out this baby, and the baby comes out, and they're like, oh, it's a girl. Well, the whole pregnancy, I'd convinced myself it was a boy. And so in that moment, I was like, that's not my baby. And for 2 weeks postpartum, I did not believe that she was mine. I wasn't able to tell her I loved her. I had a total out of body experience. It was so bizarre. I didn't get a hold of her for 2 hours after she was born because of low blood sugar. She was a teeny tiny 5 pound, 10 ounce baby at 38 and a half weeks, almost 39 weeks. And there, it was just, it unraveled. It started to unravel so many things I believed about the medical system because I had abdicated my right as a parent and responsibility as a parent to make decisions because I thought that they cared more than I could. And that was a lie that led to all of these unnecessary interventions. And so when I realized that the belief system I was holding actually caused the outcome, that helped me wake up to, wow, I really need to know what's going on in my brain for the next birth. So 2 weeks postpartum, I ended up going to the doctor. She came in. I asked her, hey, I'm just really struggling with why I had the C-section. Can you tell me why that had to happen? Like, I know the heart rate went down, but what was it? And she's like, let me just step out and look at your chart. So she stepped out, looked at the chart, came back in, and she's like, oh, yes, when we cut you open, we saw your pelvis was too small. You'll never be able to have a vaginal birth. And we wouldn't have known that unless we had done the C-section. Now, mind you, I had only gotten to 4 centimeters dilated. The baby was nowhere near having to really go through my pelvic bone. And so in that moment, I felt like all decisions had been taken from me. And I had come to a crossroads. I could either believe this diagnosis that was given to me, or I could lean into the desire. I had the desire to have a big family, and I knew that having multiple C-sections was not the best route to have a big family. I also knew that there was a dream on my heart to have a vaginal birth, but it wasn't fully conceptualized yet. So I had to make a decision, and I remember driving home, looking at my husband and saying, that's not going to happen. I'm not going to go through that again. So that was my big wake-up call, but I spoke a lot. Do you have any questions about that? Because I know that's so much.
No, I loved hearing the whole process. And I mean, on one hand, it breaks my heart that you had to go through all of that. But something you said earlier about even when you worked at the clinic and there were these tiny little moments that you were having
Mhm.
of like, I don't know about that, or I have questions about that, or, something just doesn't kind of connect or doesn't feel right here. And the Lord was using all those little moments for the final, what it seems like big moment of just like, okay, and now we're taking the feet out from underneath the whole thing. And we're jumping you. So we've had all these little drip, drip, drip moments. And now from your birth experience, the Lord used that as like the final catalyst to propel you on this completely different path for future births, educating yourself, personal responsibility, dreaming with the Lord. Because I don't
Mhm.
know if in your prep for your first birth, like how much, I guess I have two questions. How much of the Lord guiding you was a part of your first birth, or was it at all? Because I know that you said you had walked with the Lord for a while at that point. And something I've noticed in the conversations I've had with other Christian women as they prepare for birth is they want to feel safe, they want to have peace, they want to have maybe a more low intervention or natural delivery. But then when I get to the question of what does that look like with partnering with the Lord in your choices, or, that kind of question having to do with God, it's, these women who profess Jesus is Lord and like God is the head of their lives. But then something happens, it seems, where there's a disconnect, of like, yes, I believe that Jesus is foundational for my life, but something about birth, women seem to not really include him to that same level that they profess in their other parts of their life in their birth prep. And I'm just curious if that was the case for you. And then if that was the case, how that looked for you in future births as you made a change.
Yes, such a great question. So, when I first got pregnant, I remember having the pregnancy test say positive. I looked up in the mirror at myself and it was like looking at the reflection of it was like the enemy was saying, you were gonna birth this baby, really? And just the amount of fear that came over me, thinking, my goodness, I'm gonna have to grow a full-grown baby and it's going to have to come from me. That was the extent of my dreaming. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So I never thought, and I think part of it is fear, right? So when you are afraid of something, you are going to avoid it. And for me, the fear led me to totally giving all decision-making responsibility to somebody else who was more experienced. I thought that the medical providers would take care of it for me because I didn't want to deal with it.
Yeah.
I didn't want to have to do the work of preparing my heart, my mind, or my body for birth. Now, there was some preparation that I did with that pregnancy, including I would swim 3 days a week and I would eat dates. That was the extent of how I prepared my body,
Yeah.
thinking, oh, yeah, this is totally going to do it, not knowing that birth is like 90% mental. So, no, I did not do any of that mental prep. I
Yeah.
will say, kind of going back to the disconnect with the Lord being the foundation of everything and birth, from what I experienced, I had grown up with this belief that the Lord determines everything. So if He determined that my birth was going to be traumatic, then I had nothing, I had no capability of changing anything. So, what was any amount of preparation going to do, any amount of mental, spiritual, or physical? What did that matter if the outcome was just going to be what it was going to be? Right. And so there was a part of that I believe the enemy uses to say, yeah, don't worry about it. Like, you have no responsibility. You don't have to do anything. God has already determined that. And so, what that did was when I had the traumatic birth experience, I felt so much anger at the Lord. I
Mm.
felt so much anger. And in my healing process for that whole year, I had almost left my family because of PPD. The enemy had such a hold on me because of fear. He had lied to me and said, your family's better off without you. You might as well leave. Your husband can raise your baby better than you can. Nobody needs you around, right? And then the fear of I thought I was pregnant during that first year postpartum, and I remember going to a counselor and thinking, I work in pro-life, in the pro-life world, and thinking, if I really am pregnant right now, I'm going to abort this baby because I was so absolutely terrified of going through something like that again. And how could God let me go through something so horrific that didn't just happen on that day. It was like the backlash of that birth experience lasted a whole year for me.
Mm.
And going through that affected every part of my life. Um, so I had to understand that the Lord set up in the natural design of this universe that there are consequences to decisions. I believe He has given us the free will to make these decisions. And so the preparation that you do during pregnancy and birth can have a profound consequence on how you experience postpartum, can have a profound consequence on your marriage, on your motherhood. It impacts every single part of your life. And so this is why when I'm teaching women about home birth, I'm not just teaching them how to have a beautiful birth and a pain-free birth. I'm literally teaching them how to be equipped as mothers, as wives, as women, because the work that you do now is going to impact that part of your life. And I believe that God created birth to work. And most of the time, when left alone, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And I want to say for those that aren't really well versed on, the anatomy of the body or in actual real diagnosable problems that can happen in birth, there is an actual diagnosis that is real where the baby's head is larger than the woman's pelvis, and that is an actual emergency. It is rare, but it's an actual thing where the mom's too small, the baby's too big, and the birth can't happen. But I feel like that gets over labeled on a lot of women, unfortunately. Um, so there's that part of it. But then the other side of it is God so wisely designed our bodies to mold and move and make room for whatever size baby needs to come out. And so for them to say, you're at 4 centimeters dilated, yup, this was never going to happen to you or for you, is a really bold, outrageous thing to say. And here's the thing, if you hadn't gone forward and learned more and researched and understood more how God designed the body, you would have just accepted that and moved on into repeat C-sections, having more kids, if moving past that fear, that trauma of even getting pregnant again. So, at what point in your postpartum process did you finally start, whether it was partnering with the Lord, praying, having other people come alongside you, get to a place where you said, okay, we could have another baby. I'm okay with that. And then how did the Lord just provide a way to unlearn all those things that you had learned in nursing school and through your own experience, and even just heal you from that trauma that you went through?
Yeah, and the healing is probably the biggest part. And so that's where I started to realize, wow, the Lord was grieved by what happened to me. And when I started to see his heart for me, for my baby, and for this whole experience, that's when the healing could begin. And just to kind of go back, I was diagnosed with CPD, which is cephalopelvic disproportion. And I think having that diagnosis, like you said, it is true, like a true diagnosis is incredibly rare. However, the amount of times that it is being like put on a woman just because they weren't able to birth, um, is profound. I can't tell you how many women I've talked to who said, I've had too small of a pelvis too. But most of the time, CPD happens because of malnutrition, which most Americans do not suffer with, even if you are the poorest of the poor,
Yeah.
not enough to change your pelvis, or severe like car accidents where you've broken your pelvis. And I have had neither. And so having that diagnosis, having the questions from like throughout nursing school, just the uneasiness that was in my spirit, that paired together with this really traumatic event, helped me start asking better questions. And I think that ultimately is what is the most powerful thing that I've learned is if you ask the right questions, you're going to get better answers. And I hadn't known how to do that before. So this was the start of the journey of asking good questions. But yeah, kind of going back to that healing part, it was a slow process. I would say that first year was incredibly difficult, mostly because I didn't name what I was feeling. I suffered alone for the most part. Nobody really knew, not too many people knew that I was experiencing PTSD. I would get flashbacks in the car when I would see headlights. I would see the OR and I'd have to pull my car over. I couldn't drive past the hospital without having a panic attack. So once I could name it and feel validated in that, which happened through counseling, that was a really huge step in me healing. Now, when I had left the doctor's office at 2 weeks postpartum, I looked at my husband and I said, that's not going to happen again. That too is something that I talk with all of my clients about, is there is a profound difference between making a decision and choosing something. So in that moment, I had made a decision. Day means of, and side means cut. I literally cut off all other options. I cut off the option of having a C-section. So in my mind, that wasn't even an option. I was not going to be looking for anything like that. I was going to be looking for every alternative out there. Well, the alternatives led me to home birth. And so through that year, it was focused on reading my medical records and understanding why it happened. So much research went into CPD and into what is physiological birth. I got pregnant about 20, I believe it was, maybe I was 18 months postpartum. And I don't think I felt ready necessarily to have another baby. I had a miscarriage in between there as well. And that was just another part of, yep, you can't trust your body. And this C-section led to you having, secondary infertility and all of this. So there was so many lies that I realized, oh my goodness, my brain is constantly being bombarded with thoughts that aren't serving me. And I didn't realize that could be stopped until I got pregnant with my second. And I started to learn about neuropsychology. So basically how God created your brain to work, how God, when in the Bible it says take your thoughts captive, how you can actually do that, how it's scientific, the science backs up the Bible. You can take those thoughts captive and think about things that are good, right, true, pure, lovely, noble, anything worthy of praise, like Philippians 4:8 says. So the majority of my healing started happening when I got pregnant and with my second baby, with my third baby, I guess, here on earth. And I believe that's what the Lord does through pregnancy and birth, is he does call children a gift, right? They're not a burden. They're not a hassle. Can we believe that they are? Yes, but that's not what God believes they are. And I can see a profound healing journey that took place as soon as I got pregnant with her, because it forced me into leaning into what is true. And that is where I learned that your beliefs matter, that the thoughts that come into your mind back up the core belief systems that we have. When paired with feelings, so let's say I had this thought of your body is broken. That was a thought that would repeat in my mind. My body is broken. And then back that up with a doctor giving me a diagnosis of literally a broken body, right? Paired with the feelings of fear. I had repeated that over and over and over again in my brain, that I had formed this core belief. Thankfully, when the Lord lifted that veil for me and realized, okay, not everything you've believed through nursing school is true. It's okay to question the narratives you have believed. That doesn't make you unsafe. However, our brains were designed to keep us safe, which means we are going to stay in the familiar. And so I felt very uneasy for a while addressing some of these core beliefs that I had and reframing them, getting rid of them. It's actually neuroscience. You can get rid of a belief. And literally they can see this thought tree. They call it a thought tree. And if you want to learn more about this, Dr. Carolyn Leaf does an amazing job of describing this. But your brain has thought trees. And when you don't pay attention to, or if you don't allow the thoughts that are going to back up this belief system to stick, the thought tree will be pruned. And so that is the journey that I went on through my second pregnancy to make sure that the beliefs I had were the foundation of the outcome that I was looking for.
Mm.
So that is where I created this belief in me that God's design for birth works, right? My body was created to give birth. Most of the time when birth is left alone, it works. Those beliefs set me up to have the birth experiences I had next, which all three of them were at home. One, I would say, was pain-free. The other two were really, really hard. And there was painful moments, but it was beautiful. There was peace. There was peace with all of them. And the Lord gave me what I needed in order to go through those births and have the babies that He's given me. Yeah.
Oh man, I love nerding out with you about this stuff. And because I think maybe it taps into that nursing brain, that desire to learn and go deeper and understand. And it's so amazing when, I mean, it's not a surprise, but it's amazing to see when it does happen, this beautiful pairing, this flawless pairing with what God has already told us in His Word, what He's already revealed to us in creation, and that matches with science. That, I mean, before even science can like break apart you said it was a brain tree, is that what you said?
Thought tree, yeah.
Before science even told us about the thought tree, the Lord was telling us to mind our thoughts and to bring them captive and make them obedient to Christ. And then, like you were saying in Philippians 4:8, which is so funny that you brought that up today, because I had just maybe 30 minutes ago, that was the passage that I was reading with my kids this morning. So for anybody who doesn't know it, I'm going to read it. I went ahead and pulled it up, and I'm actually going to read verse 9 because I hadn't read that in its completed form in a while, and it just brings it all back to peace. Okay, it says, "Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, you." And that's just, it's so, of course it will. Of course He will be with you. And as believers, we know He is always with us. But as we mind our thoughts and as we cling to what is good, noble, right, pure, lovely, there's an element of better accessing and recognizing God's presence with us that we can't see as clearly when fear is at the head, when fear is in the driver's seat, or anxiety, or all these different things that threaten to steal our peace, that threaten to get our minds off of the Lord and onto the problems or the things around us that we're facing. The Lord promises in Isaiah 26, I say it all the time, I feel like, He'll keep those who have their minds fixed on Him in perfect peace. And all those things, true, noble, right, pure, lovely, that's Jesus. He's all those things. And so whenever we're fixing our mind on those things and we start to maybe think about traumas of the past or what could happen here, all these different things, and we're not thinking about all those other right things that we have here listed out in Philippians 4:8, we're going to be tempted to give in to anxiety and worry and unrighteous fear. But when we cling to those other things, there is going to be the peace of God in the decisions we make, in trying to research and understand more things. All of it, He will be in the midst, and He will be giving us peace every step of the way. And so I love that you nerded out and talked about all like the neuroscience with it, because there is so many more pieces. It comes back down to the Lord, but there are so many pieces that we can put together by His leading and by His grace that will lead us to these other kind of outcomes for our birth experiences that are different than what we had in the past, or if it's your first birth, that break the mold out of culture, out of what our Western maternity care model says it has to look like, or it has to be. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because it's so important to always bring it back to what God's Word has already told us. And then science is just giving us that backing too. Did you have something else you wanted to say?
Well, yeah, from a great tool. And I had struggled with anxiety and depression severely for about 20 years. And so the Lord also used this to really help me understand why that could be happening. And so a tool for me was if I am not feeling peace, I play it backwards. So I'm like, okay, I'm not feeling peace right now. What are the thoughts that I'm thinking right now? And so many women I work with, they're stuck on these what if scenarios, right? And so then we can refer them to where it says, do not be anxious for anything. But in another chapter, he tells us to, in by prayer and supplication, make your requests be made known to God, right? And so instead of thinking, oh my goodness, what if, I can reorient my brain. I can say, nope, I'm going to capture that thought. I'm going to say, you cannot stay. Either I rebuke it in the name of Jesus, if that is from the enemy, or if it's from my own brain belief system, I just say, nope, delete. I'm not gonna focus on you. I don't have any control over you coming in, but I have control of you going out. And I say, this is what is true. And so what is true is that the Lord will keep you in perfect peace, that the Lord will give you the wisdom in the moment of what I need to do. And that has transformed the way that I approach birth. And I will tell you, the 3 home births I had, they were all full of weird diagnosis and weird things that I was able to practice this and drill it into me so deeply that I will never go back to the way that I was living before, because he has shown me in such profound ways that me thinking that I can control anything is just causing more harm than it is good. But when I can orient my eyes on him, that's where the peace is, like you were saying in Isaiah. So
Yes. Oh, so good. Okay, so with that, along with the Lord just walking you through the importance of guarding your mind and guarding your thoughts as you planned for your home births after your cesarean, was there ever a moment where you doubted the Lord that he would give you this dream for your home birth that you were having? And then I guess kind of in tandem with it, because sometimes I think the crunchy community can get a bad rep. And sometimes there's well within reason for the bad rep. But I think there's this idea that, you can only experience the Lord's provision for you or have these really peaceful and faith deepening experiences if they're at home, if you're going to choose to do this like less medicalized route. But can you just kind of talk a little bit about how the Lord is not constrained to home birth, right? Like the Lord's presence and what you've even talked about today in this conversation about guarding your mind and filling it with those right and lovely things, that's pertinent wherever you have your baby. It does not have to be at home. But okay, so I doubled up my questions on you. So talking about how you worked with the Lord through those doubts that you had that were coming up as you were preparing for your home births. And then from there, just any encouragement to anybody who maybe wants this type of birth you're talking about, but still isn't ready to leave the hospital quite yet.
yeah, so good. Okay, so the first thing that comes to mind is with my first home birth, I wasn't quite ready to like fully leave the medical system, because there was a part of me that was like, well, it's been given by God to like protect me. And so
Right.
I chose co-care with a provider. So I went in at 18 weeks for a anatomy scan, and at that scan they saw that I had placenta previa, and he from there was like, can't have a home birth with placenta previa. Actually, we're gonna need to do ultrasounds every week, and then probably start planning for your C-section around 36 weeks. And he didn't give me any measurements during that time. He just said, this is what it's going to be. Sorry, like I know you really wanted that. So I left, and I had my 2-year-old with me, and I left that doctor's appointment thinking, what the heck, God? You told me to do a home birth, and now this? Like, this doesn't make any sense to me. Why would you give me a dream and make this like the only option? Because in my head, it's like the only option. Why would you put me in this position and then allow something like this to happen? And there was still some parts of God that I didn't understand. I thought that he wanted to just show me something and prove to me something and kind of like be this harsh taskmaster. Like, I'm going to just test you and it's going to. So I was seeing God in such a harsh way during that time. And I remember calling my midwife and just breaking down in tears and thinking, well, it's all done. It's over. And this is it for me. God obviously doesn't care about birth. And, again, all of these thoughts just kept coming in my head. And
Yeah.
I remember she let me cry. She let me vent. And then she said, Allie, can I tell you something? And she said, I never make, and this is a 70, 80-year-old woman who has delivered thousands of babies. Okay. She said, I never make decisions out of fear. And that transformed my life in that moment because I realized any decision I would make at that moment would be from fear. And so she prayed for me. I had to come home and face the fear instead of running from it like I did in my first birth. And I
Mm.
think the Lord was so good and so kind to use it, to use this anatomy scan, to use this moment to teach me that He has given me authority as a mom to face the fears with Him. I'm not saying, hey, God, you're my vending machine. I'm going to pray to you. You're going to make my placenta move. No, it was, I am going to look to you as the only answer in this situation, and I am going to follow whatever steps you have for me. And being in that place of surrender is where the peace came. Because it's nothing, I couldn't make my placenta move. Like that is something only the Lord could do. And in His goodness, He did. And I chose not to go get ultrasounds until I did one around 34 weeks. It was a very, very small margin. If I would have gone to the hospital, they would have still done a C-section because it would still be classified as placenta previa. But this is where I partnered with him in doing my research. I looked at the studies. I talked to my midwife and I did what I could do to prepare my mind and my body and my spirit for whatever came. And at the same time, I trusted that ultimately He was going to lead me into good things. And I was believing that about Him instead of He just wants to punish me for some reason, right? That's not how I see Him anymore. And He had to use birth to show me His heart for me and my children. So there's been other instances during pregnancies, such as my birth after that. I had a weird bleeding episode 2 days before it was actually on my due date, but 2 days before I had her, I had a huge gush of blood. And just thinking, this is it. I'm going to have to go to the hospital. And now He has gotten me to a point where we were faced with a transfer with my last baby. And I didn't end up going, I should finish that story because people are going to wonder. I didn't end up going to the hospital with that baby. It was an unexplained gush of blood, no idea why it happened. And through prayer, discussion with my midwife, and then listening to my intuition that God has given me as a tool to make decisions, I felt safe just staying at home. And she ended up being born 2 days later. And then with my last baby, there was a moment during birth where we discussed having to transfer because of low heart tones and just thinking, okay, God, you have taken me through so many different things and I will keep my eyes on you. If the hospital is where I need to go, of course, I will go there. Here's the deal. With my first home birth, I was still terrified of going to the hospital. But with my other pregnancies, the Lord had taken me through such healing of my traumatic birth, such healing of the secondary trauma I experienced as a doula. And He had empowered me so much in my decisions that I knew if I had to transfer into the hospital, I would have done everything in my power to go along with God's design for birth. And I would know that it was 100% necessary and that the Lord would go before me. And I was able to attend a birth right before my fourth baby where she was planning a home birth and she ended up transferring after 5 days of having broken waters. She went in to get an induction. And I remember talking through this with her because she was grieving the fact that she wasn't going to get the home birth she had planned for. And we were able to just walk together, pray together. Her husband ultimately, prayed for her and was so good in making a decision. Um, and it was so amazing. The prayer, like we walked in and Caleb was playing like at the nursing desk. And then she ends up getting this nurse who was training to be a midwife who would use a Doppler on her instead of continuous fetal monitoring and who ultimately left the room so that the this mom delivered her baby on the hospital floor like by herself. So I know peace can come. I know that the Lord can come with you. But this friend of mine, she prepared so intentionally for her birth. And so I would say for the hospital moms, it's not just about knowing how to advocate for yourself, what could happen in the hospital, like what are the interventions. It's not necessarily even about avoiding interventions. It's a better question to ask is what aligns with God's design for birth? And how can I walk in that design best? Right. And so, from asking that question, my core belief is that every woman, this might be a little controversial, but every woman should consider home birth as the first option.
Yeah.
And from there, if there's a medical reason to go to the hospital, you go to the hospital because that's what it's there for. And I'm thankful for the times that it is needed in a medical capacity. But from working with so many women over the past 8 years, I have seen that birth is not a medical event, but it has been medicalized. And so asking yourself, why am I choosing what I am choosing? Is it out of fear or is it out of a sound mind? Because the Bible tells us we should not be making decisions from fear, but out of a sound mind. And he promises to give us the wisdom that we need in order to make these decisions. So if you're kind of on the fence in between decisions, pray and ask him, what do you want me to be doing? Give me the wisdom I need to make a decision that aligns with your design.
Yes. Ooh, man, you made me want to choose home birth all over again if I have any more babies. You, you've done it. I feel like you just took me on a seminar, and I really enjoyed that. No, I loved that, Allie. Yeah. So for anybody who's listening and who, after hearing that, has moved from I would never do a home birth or, the hospital is where I feel safest. But now, you're listening to Allie and you're like, hold on, maybe there's some evaluation to do. Maybe it is an actual option. It still might not be the option for you, but you're finding yourself now after hearing this conversation, just feeling a little tug and curiosity. Number one, Allie has phenomenal resources that you can download. Some of them you can download for free that I will put in the show notes of today's episode. But then also, Allie is a coach. Like Allie will help you, guide you if you set up a consult, if you set up a time to have a session with her and walk through home birth choices, like walk through and not just choices, but what could the Lord uniquely be talking to you right now about, putting a dream in your heart about, and how to help you navigate that. And her husband even helps too in some regards. I saw that you shared this on your social media, I think yesterday, about you guys had a birth circle with dads.
Yeah, so my friend Jamie Miller, who's a birth photographer, and we host a monthly birth circle. And so this has grown to over 100 women who are in our community deeply desiring to have a home birth. And so in our community, home birth access is very limited, as in a lot of places. And so we focus on community birth and women supporting women during their birth experience. So yeah, last night we had a dad panel to answer questions that dads have. That's something that my husband does. We do coach couples on how to have that peaceful home birth. Our marriage has grown and deepened in intimacy and trust through birth. And so we want other couples to enjoy the fruit that can come when you are intentional about preparing for birth in a Christ-centered way.
I love that. I absolutely love that. I think that's so cool because I know whenever I have had conversations with women who have expressed an interest in maybe home birth or even just a birth center birth, anything outside of the hospital, one of the biggest drawbacks for them or the biggest hesitations isn't always like all the logistics of what that would look like to do it at home instead of at the hospital, but it's their husbands being concerned.
Mhm.
And I get it. Like there's that beautiful design that God's implanted in husbands to be these protectors and defenders, and they want in whatever limited way they can to offer that to their wives. And a lot of times, maybe it's ingrained, maybe there's some truth behind it, but there's just this idea that the only way they can make sure that their family is safe, their wife is safe, is through birthing at the hospital. And so having this panel and having what you guys offer in these couples coaching calls, I think is really profoundly helpful to just let's break things down. Let's navigate the things that are true that we would actually need a hospital for versus, if we aren't finagling with the process and we are allowing it to happen as God designed and partnering with him in that, there's a whole lot of beauty in things that you would miss out on maybe if you didn't at least look at this as an option. And so giving those husbands kind of just the educational backing and support that your wife's not crazy for thinking maybe this is an idea that could be considered, and how can you love her and protect her in the process of trying to decide if home birth is the right path for you and your wife and your baby coming into the world. So love that. You guys go check out Allie's podcast, all of her resources, all of her coaching tools. If that is what you want to press into your birth and planning, she is a phenomenal resource. And I am so glad that we got to have you on to hear your wisdom and your knowledge. You have blessed me personally, and I know that you've been a blessing to whoever has listened today. Do you have any final closing thoughts that you would like to share? With any moms that we have listening today, anything that comes to mind.
Yeah, my heart is just so full talking with you and knowing that there really is a movement and a cultural shift that's happening, especially since 2020. So many people are starting to ask better questions. Um, and so, like Audrey said, if you are feeling a tug on your heart, listen to it. And have your next step be getting wisdom from somebody else. It's praying about it. It's talking to your husband, starting that conversation with your husband, knowing where are you at right now? Where's your foundation? And then what we talked about earlier on is dreaming. That is the very first thing that I have my clients go through is dreaming with the Lord. What does he want for your birth? It says in the Bible that he gives you the desires of your heart. And I think that's been totally misconstrued for people. It's like, well, I have a desire for like a Ferrari, or for a lot of the crunchy girls is like for a house on 10 acres, like with cows and chickens and stuff. That's the desire he's put on my heart. Well, he's not a vending machine. For many years, I thought he was a vending machine. But I do believe that he uses our intuition, he uses our imagination. Those are things that he has given us. He's given us feelings as tools, and to hear him. And so I believe that if you have a heart to home birth, that does align with God's design and it does align with his heart for you most of the time. So, just want to encourage you to pursue that feeling that you have in your heart right now.
Yes. Oh, I'm hype. I always leave these conversations with you or hearing you on your own podcast just with a renewed excitement for birth and just the beauty that God so wisely implanted into it, that he can use that to draw us closer to him, whether
Amen.
it's yes, whether it's in the birth experience itself and his faithful presence with us through it all, or in just recognizing that we need him for every decision of our lives and what he works out in us and how he refines us as we continuously surrender and resurrender our plans, our hopes, our dreams for our births to him, into his
Amen.
hands, because absolutely his hands are the best place to place all of your dreams and hopes and desires, friends. He will never fail you. Whatever the
Amen.
outcome is, there will be no failure on the part of the God who loves you and made you and desires you to know him forever and ever. So, thank you again, Allie, for coming on. It was such a blessing to talk to you, and I will refer all the people to you. For such a
Thank
blessing today.
you so much. Thanks
Yes.
for having me.
Thanks for joining me today, friend. If today's episode blessed you, the best way you can let me know is by leaving a written review on Apple Podcasts. You can also tag me on Instagram with a screenshot of today's episode at faithful.labor. Now, before we part ways, I'd like to pray Ephesians 3:20 over you. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, I pray that God would be mightily glorified through you as you seek to honor him with your faithful labor. Amen, and God bless.